It is so great to see you. What have you been up to, Tami?
Oh my gosh, I've been up to a lot. I've been up to a little bit of PPE sourcing because that seems to be the most important thing to do to save lives these days. But that is so far outside my primary goals in life, which are still in the impact investing space, preaching, evangelizing about impact to mostly my favorite evangelizing is to all the investors who don't believe in it and don't think it's about them and think they're long, short, macro, and telling them why it actually matters to them as well and will improve their returns while aligning with their values. So I've still, even in the Zoom world, have been on a lot of calls and working with I have a new client who I think it'll come up later probably, depending what you're asking me about leaders who care, but I just started working with True Colors and George Taylor. So doing like bringing down gang violence by jobs in the community. So a bunch of cool clients like that, just figuring out what we can do in the Zoom world is really not that different than the real world, in some ways more efficient with less travel.
So you kind of remind me of when Jay Leno spoke to Robin Williams. All I had to do was say, "Hey, Robin," and the interview just kept going.
I know, I'm like, I'll stop now. Ask me about any of those. I can go deep on all of them.
So can you do me a favor then, going backwards? It's probably my fault, my bad. Can you introduce yourself?
Oh, was that what you meant when you said, what are you up to these days?
It's a conversation. But
who is Tami? Let's see. Well, so like I started to say, I'm an evangelist in impact. And so raising the level of impact for social entrepreneurs and for impact investors to say, asking the right questions, asking questions they often don't ask in the diligence phase of, especially my favorite thing in the world is looking at, if you succeed in your business model, what will that break? How can you see it up front? And then working with them to then change their models up front to free up to get more impact and better financial returns. So I do a lot of that. I'm also about to be launching my own podcast, but that will be like for next time. So I've been doing some work on lining up some of that. You're an inspiration.
You and a 4 gazillion other people that are launching.
Yes, I believe I saw there's 1 million now. So I just have a little bit to compete with, but I feel like I have a voice.
You do have a voice, and it's not competition. It's actually good stuff. So
yeah, it's fun. And I just, anything I can do to spark other people thinking a little bit differently, getting more excited about things in their world that they can do better and have more fun doing it. That's what excites me and wakes me up in the morning.
Well, if anybody can make an impact like that, I know who it is. So no doubt about it. So answer me this.
In a month or two, we'll see how I'm doing so far.
Awesome. Can you answer this question for me? It's kind of a little bit like the why, but it's more like, why do you do what you do?
Why do I do what I do? Tikkun olam, right? So heal the world. I think that I was raised, I'm Jewish, and Jewish or not, I think very Judeo-Christian, Muslim, all of it is, and certainly First Nations is about looking at the world and how can we raise it up, how can we help our communities and the larger community and the greater good. And I think that was embedded in me from a really young age. And also, honestly, part of it is I'm ADHD. If you couldn't tell, I think that serves me well in some ways, probably not in others, but I see a lot of things at once. And I used to feel like it was like these spider webs, like weighing down stickiness in my head, that every time I saw something, I would think of the 10 other things that connected to. And the most empowering movie I have ever seen, and you'll laugh very hard, I could try and make you guess, but you wouldn't come up with it, is Frozen. And it's Frozen because fractals. And all of a sudden I went, oh my God, that's how my brain sees. I see in fractals, which is far more empowering than spider webs. And I realized that that's kind of the why I do what I do, is I see like a spark of something and I see where it connects to something else and something else. And it's so much easier to just help put people together and connect things that can fix bigger issues that neither could do alone than it is to ignore it and have it always bouncing around in my brain. So it just makes me show up and do it instead.
Plus the bouncing around in your brain can actually hurt sometimes. No, that's a good answer. And yeah, I'm shocked about the ADHD.
Never saw that.
No, I just thought it was like passionate, like crazy.
It may be, maybe.
Yeah. So you're obviously aligned with who we are, and vice versa in that sense. But we both know it's taken brands and leaders of brands forever, decades, to finally realize that aligning with social impact is, man, maybe a good idea, and
Right?
to
Who
do
would have thought?
something good. And holy cow, it could be good for business. And like we talked, I think of it one time there, it actually is the only way to get talent, the best talent, to come to the company. Because now,
Yeah.
especially what I do with search, executive search, they'll ask the questions: what are you doing to make a difference, right? So with that, and you've kind of partly answered it, you've always been enthusiastic ever since I've known you, which I love, and a pioneer and a thought leader of impact investing, but also partner alliances. Speaking of
Yeah.
connecting the dots, so again, partly answering the question, but in a short version, I know that Jewish, I'm Jewish too.
It's a challenge for me.
In a short version, what would you say really differentiates you as one of the leaders who care?
Empathy. And I don't, and a lot of people have empathy, but more from the empath part, that I'm an empath, which we could totally get into in some other episode. But that I've always been able to feel what other people felt around me, which is not always a fun skill. Like, I'd be the kid who knew who was suicidal out of 100 kids who weren't even close friends of mine, and I hear subtext. But because of that, I'm also able to jump in and understand whether it's the janitor or the principal, whether it's AOC or Trump. Like, I can see things from other people's perspectives, even if they're not remotely mine. And it makes it a lot easier to, when you have empathy for kids in inner cities, for foster kids, and you don't want to blame people for the differences, but get intellectually curious about why they are where they are, and how together you can serve a greater good, and where you can find that commonality, or where you can just jump into their skin and pull them to a place that's more empowering for them, has just always been something that excited me.
Yeah, it's interesting you say jump into their skin, because we're about to do something with business leaders who care about walk a mile in someone else's shoes, and which is to really find out what it's like. I'm sure your grandparents have said the same things my grandparents probably said, and maybe many others, but it really hit home for me when they would always say with a Ukrainian Kiev accent, as long as you have your health, that's the most important thing, right? And then there'd be education, but and it wasn't a branding, it wasn't a slogan. It was like, because of where they come from. So here we are. Technology is still zooming like no tomorrow. Pandemic, we thought that was enough to handle. We got, rightly so, finally the tipping point for racism and social injustice. So we have kind of like an awakening. We have time to think about what's going on. What I really want to know is what your thoughts are about what our awareness is going to be when we're at work, when we're at home, when we're in the community. What are we going to be like?
To me, it's a really exciting time, because we managed to, the COVID, the biggest epiphany to me, when the lockdown first started happening in March, and I'm in Connecticut, so we had a real lockdown really quickly in the tri-state area. I'm in Fairfield County, so like New York light. And the first thing that blew my mind was that one town over from my very wealthy suburb, 57% of kids were on free or reduced lunch before COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And then a lot of those parents lost their jobs, and those kids suddenly, so we're talking 60, 70, 80% of an entire town in one of the wealthiest states in the country, in one of the wealthiest counties in the country. And how many kids had no access, even here in Connecticut, much less a lot of other states, to internet. So they literally physically couldn't do the work. So that divide, I think that was an awakening call for a lot of us, even that work in the space, and certainly for other people who are just completely oblivious.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no way that you can get ahead or be equal, regardless of color of skin, if you start out in those communities. And then with George Floyd, it like leveled up that awakening even more to understanding. And some of this I've been involved in some discussions and some solution building. So some of it, this stuff that's been coming up, I've been more aware of on the inequities, racial and other, and socioeconomic. For me, it's an exciting time, because I don't think we can go back. And I think enough people finally get that this is a tipping point. And in the systems thinking of it, I don't know if this was going to come up in the next question, so like I have before, I'll jump ahead. But in the systems thinking of it, what I'm excited about, I think the defund police is a really unfortunate tagline for what, if you talk to people that are behind the policy, really mean by it, which is reforming budgets, right? And reallocating. So it's reallocating policing to be everywhere else. But when you look at that, if anyone, I challenge anyone listening to go and look at their state's budget. Forget police, just look at your state's budget in prisons, in prison systems, in police, in crime, and what that costs, in insurance payouts, in all of that budget. And then if you were to just take 10 or 20% of that toward kids' education in the lowest income communities, and do it colorblind, but when you do it that way, you're actually getting a lot of those minority communities that have been left behind. And then you take some of it and you put it toward, job placement for people when they get out of prison, so they have another opportunity, and you figure out what that saves you. It turns out that you can more than cover the costs from the budget just by reallocating the right way. And I think that this is the first time where it's not me and you and a couple of people that have this idea and this utopian world. Finally, people are realizing that writ large, we need to do this to get to anywhere that any of us want to see 5 or 10 years from now, even for our own communities to be safe. For those who are just totally self-centered, it still makes sense for them, for where their tax dollars go, to have them go in a better way. That's going to actually bring down the cost of it ultimately in the 5 or 10 year by empowering more people. So to me, it's a really exciting time in a systems thinking brain. We're at a crossroads that I think is going to do some really great things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think for everything, it's coming out now that if you will, we're all in this together. But whatever we do does actually impact everything. It makes your business stronger. It makes your talent stronger, their family stronger, the community stronger. I compare a lot of things to sports leagues, and if one team is winning all the trades, it means someone else is losing all the trades. Yeah. And if one team keeps winning the championship, how valuable is that championship if the league has no value? There's nothing there.
Exactly.
So we're all in this together. And
being a Wolverine, I feel that way about Ohio State these days, but that's maybe not for this conversation.
No, I can get that, living in the USC, UCLA world, or living in Florida with the Gators,
exactly,
and the Hurricanes.
But, yeah, and then I want to touch on something that you had touched on as far as recruiting. And right before COVID happened and all this happened in January, I was actually talking to a room full of CIOs of big family offices and wealth advisors about BlackRock and Larry Fink and why the pivot. So, and I'll assume that in this crowd, in your pod crowd, a lot of people know what I'm talking about. But if not, just looking at his letter to CEOs that he's written every year for years, and then 3 years ago he had this pivot of saying, hey, we have to care about stakeholders, not just shareholders. And everyone's like, what's he talking about? He didn't expect to get a lot of attention, but to his credit, when he did get attention, he doubled down a year ago. And then this past January, so just a couple months back, talked about the reshaping of finance. So he was in that way ahead of his time in this, right? Like he actually called it out in a very business sense of then what ended up happening that no one could have foreseen. But I think when people have asked part of why he did that, and I would love for someone from BlackRock to reach out and tell me if I'm hypothesizing correctly, but I believe what happened is, among other things, they've been recruiting based on that, $1 or $2 trillion out of our $6 trillion at the time, that's more now, that Deborah Winshall's in charge of, is impact investing, or impact aligned, and we care. And that's been a recruiting tool, among other things. But that's been a recruiting tool for years. So suddenly those employees are now middle management. And so not just the millennials, and now you have the Gen Zs coming in, and they genuinely care. And at some point you reach a tipping point, and there's other things. And when I've talked about it, going to some of the other outside market forces on calling them out on their proxy votes and all, but internally, I think that going back to what you were talking about with companies and recruiting, as you recruit, as those millennials are starting to have more power, it's a lot of them, it's in their DNA that if you saw an inconvenient truth in junior high, and then you're told the traditional, the boomers and the Gen X of like, well, do you want clean water or do you want profits? Like if you have profits now, you can always clean the water later. The very John D. Rockefeller approach, right? Which worked for decades for some people.
Well, it depends what you mean by worked.
Right. Well, I said for some people, for many people, not so much for others, but that was like the mindset was like, well, yeah, I'll choose the profits now and I'll just clean the water later. If you ask any millennial or any Gen Z, So do you want clean water or do you want profits? They look at you like you're crazy. Like, who chooses? Of course you want
Exactly.
both. It's a non-discussion, and no one would work for a company that chooses either one or the other when they think about it through like what that iterates out to meaning. And I think that that's where we see companies really having to walk the talk a lot more.
Yeah, well, I certainly found the tipping point, to quote that twice already, where they finally realized they weren't getting the best talent if they didn't do this, and and they realized that you spend so much time at work. If it's just a job, then our hearts and souls are filled by belonging to something important, not just money, and that becomes a big deal. And in some ways, it's asking a parent, well, which kid do you love more?
Right.
I mean, you can't, or I can't have another kid because how am I going to love them? I don't have any more love. I want to give it all to him or her, so
Exactly.
it's not there. So what do you see as the business leaders who care? And by the way, I love the way you're framing this, because the whole point of us having trademarked the term leaders who care was to make the point that you can care and do well at the same time. And
Yep.
so how do you see the role business leaders should play in the aspect of well-being for their people? And I'm talking about
Get out of the
what you
sunlight.
alluded to. You're fine. You're sunny without the sun. Even.
Okay, there we go.
Um, the financial well-being, the mental well-being, the physical well-being, their role in making sure that exists for them, and realizing that, as you've said, it's good for business, but also good for the whole community.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's where we're seeing, especially even more so with the COVID, or sorry, with the racial equity with the George Floyd response, right? That it's about the whole community, and even with COVID, with people realizing that their customers, the ones who genuinely, the leaders who care, who have a mindset of customer and stakeholder and shareholder and stakeholder, not just shareholder, not just their own bottom line. I
Mhm.
noticed this with restaurants and even shoe stores and bakeries. The ones who had a mindset of community, of that they're part of a community, when everything got shut down and their customers couldn't come in anymore, they were the first to pivot and serve frontline responders. There was a shoe store in Connecticut that went and did, and obviously no one can go there, and we're all stuck at home for months. And they went and took their most expensive clogs, like kind of like Crocs, but like the fancy $200 or some other brand, I don't know what it is, and decided to do 200 of them that they're going to give to nurses and doctors who are on their feet for 12 hours or more, and you got to nominate them. But it got them on all the news coverage. It got them all this replacement. It got people remembering them and caring about them because they cared. And so there's a virtuous cycle, and I see that again and again. And there was a baker, a woman who put her whole heart and soul and all her money into her bakery, and it was going to close down and not survive. And she thought, well, all these parents must be going crazy that are stuck at home with their kids all the time, and there's birthdays and all these things that little kids are missing. So she started putting together kits where they got the cookies, and then would buy it with already the pre-color frostings and the little dinosaurs for boy kids and fairies for girl kids, and parents could just like curbside pickup and bring home a kit. And she's making bank. She can't cook fast enough.
Yeah.
And so that's what I see as the difference. Like, leaders who care actually are getting ahead right now, and leaders who think they're about their company and their customers and they're out there shouting how it's so unfair and we need to reopen with no regard for community spread are the ones who are paying the price. And I don't know, that's exciting for me. I think I'm seeing more of a karmic world than I usually do.
Yeah, well, it's real though, and they will. The ones who are there in crisis, the same way as when a coach is there for a player, no matter what, then
Yeah.
good stuff will come to that person because people will see the real deal at that.
Yep, absolutely.
So
I
it
think we're
does.
seeing that actually with some of the sports leagues, as you talk about that, like the difference in the leagues that say, you know what, we get there's a crisis. We want to support you. We want to be here for you. We want to work with our players unions and our players reps and figure out how to do what's best for the health of our own players and their families and the communities we serve, versus ones that just want to pretend like they can fight this and then ignore it and go back to business as usual. And you see it from the fans and how they're treating each of those leagues depending on what choices they're making, and whether or not they have freedom to make statements and express what's most important to them or not.
Yeah. So last quick question on this. two-sentence type of answer, give or take. I know that's impossible, so forget it. So
Do
pretend,
not learn on sentences. I will commit to.
now, pretend I'm a graduate. Pretend I'm a high school graduate or a college graduate, doesn't matter. And I come to you and I say, man, my girlfriend's pissed. I wasn't able to do prom and she's pissed at me. We didn't have the graduation. You know, what do I do? What now? What do you tell me?
I tell you what I told my nephew, who is 17. Like, it's a great time to high school or college graduate to figure out what you can do. I mean, you have this phone, this thing. You have more power literally than NASA did when it put the first spaceship in the sky to the moon. Like, that's crazy. And social entrepreneurship exists in a way where there's so much you can do. There was a 17-year-old, again, in Connecticut and Westport, who in March or April went to all the stores and helped them figure out how to do online commerce. And he's the one who created the town website. And there's so much to do. And there's so many ways to, you know, find online Zoom pen pals in another country, do really cool things. And there's so many ways to build community, build your resume, and make money. And honestly, there are so many adults that do not know, for some, I don't know how, do not know up till now how to use Zoom. It's hard to believe that was many months into it. Grandparents have figured it out, but others, like, there's so many things you can do as a service online, honestly, that you're so much more ahead of people that are older, that kids who need tutoring, who are in elementary school and can't do it from home, their parents can't help them because they're working. I don't know, there's just lots of stuff to do. As a kid, I think it's actually it can be a great time to be a kid because you're all in this together around the world, which is crazy.
Well said. It was like 13 sentences, but
yeah, I might not have done it.
But it was really good.
But I did take a breath in between, so I feel like that counts as one sentence.
Yeah, I was breathless also. So, but other than that, thank you so much. You're the best.
So much fun. Thank you.